Well, hey there. I hope you're doing great today. And if you are in the US, then you are most likely preparing for Thanksgiving. And while when we think about Thanksgiving, we think about this delicious meal, often we think a little bit about guilt at overindulging. But I'm here to help you feel a little bit better about what things are going to be on your plate this Thanksgiving. Did you know that your Thanksgiving dinner actually may be one of the most nourishing meals that you'll eat all year? While it's easy to think of it as an overindulgence, the foods on your table, from sweet potatoes to squash to sage, are packed with nutrients that strengthen your immune system, support digestion, and prepare your body for winter. And here's the best part: every one of those dishes can start right in your garden. Even the cranberries that add that bright pop of color to your plate. I love some cranberry sauce. I don't know about you. In today's episode, we're going to be exploring 7 Thanksgiving foods that you can grow in your own garden as we look at what makes dishes like mashed potatoes, sweet potato casserole, and even homemade stuffing so good for us, both on the table and in the garden. I don't know about you, but I absolutely love putting things on my Thanksgiving table that I grew myself. It brings this beautiful culmination to the harvest season that I can't wait to do every year. And that's really what Thanksgiving is all about, right? Well, before we dig into these Thanksgiving crops, if any of these are already on your radar for next year's garden, or they will be once you hear about today's episode, then my 2026 Complete Garden Planner will help you get a head start to brainstorming all the ideas. It includes pages to help you map out your garden beds, organize your garden schedule, and even there's a section for variety research, so you can compare which types of potatoes, squash, or herbs will do best in your climate. You can check this out. It's customizable, printable, so you can grab it right now at journeywithjill.net/shop. We're going to talk about 7 foods, and then I'm going to add a bonus one at the end. But number 1 is potatoes. This is one that's often on our tables as mashed potatoes or scalloped potatoes. There's lots of different ways we can cook potatoes, right? But potatoes, even though they get a bad rap because they are a little bit more high carb and starchy, and they're the main ingredients in French fries, they are actually an excellent source of vitamin C. And as we know, vitamin C helps to support our immune health as colds increase in the winter. It also has quite a bit of potassium, which aids muscle and heart function. And you know what else actually helps potatoes grow really well in the garden? Yeah, potassium. Isn't that interesting how that works that way? One thing that I'm constantly finding interesting, and I'm continually learning as much as I can about this, is how foods pair together for optimal function in our bodies. When we think about potatoes, when they are eaten paired with other vitamin A rich foods that we'll be talking about later, like sweet potatoes, you actually get a balanced antioxidant boost for winter immunity. So, potatoes for the win. Now, here's the thing about growing potatoes. This is something I didn't know. I've talked about it a little bit in the past, but when we start to choose what varieties we want to grow in our garden, we might want to consider how we want to cook them, because a potato is not a potato is not a potato when it comes to how you cook it. So if you're wanting mashed potatoes, this is probably my favorite way to cook potatoes, is you want to choose a starchy type like a Yukon Gold or an Elba, because it's going to have a smooth, creamy texture. If you prefer roasted potatoes, which is probably my second favorite, maybe really close to mashed potatoes. I don't know, you roast them real good with some butter and some Parmesan and they're delicious. But those are going to be better for your waxy type potatoes like Corolla or Red Gold, because they hold their shape. If you like scalloped potatoes, you might go for a Kennebec or a Gold Rush, because these are medium starch. They have good structure for cream absorption. And then if you want any kind of mixed dishes, then you've got Butte and Russet Burbank that have a classic fluffy interior. All of these varieties are available, plus more, at Wood Prairie Family Farm, which is where I get all of my organic, certified disease-free seed potatoes when I start to plant them in the spring. And you can choose which texture you want for your garden. And then depending on your climate, you can also choose early, mid, or late season maturity. Those of you who are in warmer climates like mine, early season maturity tend to do a little bit better if we get really, really hot. If you have grown potatoes this year or you're planning on it next year, the biggest challenge, especially if you're in an area that where you harvest your potatoes early, like I usually harvest mine in June and July, one of the biggest challenges is storing them well enough so that they can last until Thanksgiving. With that in mind, here are some ways that you can extend the storage life as long as possible. Once you dig up your potatoes, you want to cure them in an area that is dark. It'd be nice if you could find it about 60 degrees, although in June or July, that's probably not going to happen. So for me, I try to put it in the coolest, darkest room of my house. And then after it cures, if you can find a dark place at 40 to 50 degrees, again, June, July, not possible for me. But the closest you can get to the cool, the better. And that's going to allow them to store longer. And of course, you want plenty of airflow. If you're harvesting it late in the season, maybe you're living up north and you harvest your potatoes before winter sets in, this is probably going to be easier for you because maybe even your garage is going to stay around 40 degrees, which would be perfect for those root crops. Actually, I'm thinking about now that winter has started to arrive and we're getting really cold at night, I'm thinking about moving my potatoes and my onions into my garage, and I'm going to see if I can get them to store a little bit longer. Just side note, we'll see how that does. But whatever you do, avoid the fridge because when you get too cold, that starts to convert the starch to sugar, and that's not going to be a good thing. Crop number 2 we're going to talk about is winter squash and pumpkin. You're probably thinking about pumpkin pie, maybe roast squash, stuffed squash boats, soups. We find ways to use winter squash a lot in the wintertime. The great news is, and I didn't realize this before I started growing them and researching them, is that most winter squashes like butternut or kabocha can actually replace pumpkin in pies, soups, and roasted dishes. The flavor and the texture are often quite similar, if not even better. This is where I have found growing tromboncino squash, which is, it's a squash that you can harvest early and you can eat it like zucchini, or you can let it cure. It's like a very long squash, but you can let it dry out on the vine like a regular winter squash. I found that I've been able to use that in like pumpkin breads that ask for pumpkin, or soups that ask for pumpkin. Because for me, growing pumpkins has been really difficult because we have the squash vine borer. And while the squash vine borer is something I can work around with summer squash because I can just plant them several times because they come to harvest so much quicker, pumpkins are harder because pumpkins, especially larger pumpkins, are a longer season crop. And so it's not like I could replant it again and again. You just really need it to go all season. And so if I want something like a pumpkin, I can either choose a smaller pumpkin, because occasionally I have been able to get the small pumpkins to harvest before the squash vine borer kills the plant, or I can grow something like tromboncino squash or use a butternut type squash in place of that so that I could still have it for some of those recipes. Now, for any kind of winter squash, it's going to be rich in vitamin A and potassium, and this would be helpful for your immune and heart health. And this is key as daylight decreases and physical activity typically slows in the winter. And when you pair squash with butter or cream, this fat helps your body to absorb vitamin A. Now, I want to go on a little bit of a vitamin A tangent because I thought this was interesting when I was researching it. You'll notice as we talk that crops like this winter squash and even sweet potatoes are rich in vitamin A. And while we probably understand that crops like potatoes with vitamin C are going to be helpful as we go into winter for immune support, vitamin A is one of those nutrients that our bodies especially needs during the winter. It supports our immune system. It also helps keep our eyes and our skin healthy, which is why those orange and gold vegetables like sweet potatoes and squash are so valuable as we head into winter. The body converts their beta carotene into usable vitamin A as we need it, and it gives us a steady source of immune support throughout the cold season. And because vitamin A is fat soluble, now listen up, this is great news for that Thanksgiving table. Pairing these vegetables with a little butter or olive oil, basically a fat source, this actually helps our body absorb it better. So yes, that buttery sweet potato casserole that we're going to be talking about later is maybe not as bad of an indulgence as we think every now and then, because it helps us to absorb that vitamin A. Crop number 3 is probably one that you remember when you were doing any kind of Thanksgiving programs when you were a kid, and that is corn. And we usually identify corn with Native Americans because many of us learned growing up, and I know my kids were taught this at a field trip when they were young, that Native Americans often would plant corn in a three sisters method. This is the concept where you plant corn, beans, and squash all together. And this is not just folklore. It actually did happen. It's rooted in indigenous agricultural tradition. However, not all tribes use this, but some practiced it extensively. But I hate to bust your image on the first Thanksgiving. There's no historical record of corn on the cob being served at the first Thanksgiving. Most likely it was ground into cornmeal for bread or for porridge. As far as nutrition goes, corn actually provides B vitamins and fiber for sustained energy and digestive support. And here's what I love about this. I think corn gets a bad rap just like potatoes do. But when you pair corn with protein-rich beans, you're going to get a complete protein. Complete proteins are only typically found in meats, in just a few plant sources, but very few. That's why I was thinking the other day how one of my daughter's favorite meals is beans and cornbread. And we just think about that. I don't know if that's a Southern thing or not, but now I realize how important that is. Beans and cornbread, we have that perfect protein pairing. And maybe that's because even though they didn't necessarily have the science confirming this, maybe that's one reason indigenous peoples often grew and ate them together. They were really good for the body. Now, if you want to grow corn in your garden next year, you can grow sweet corn, which is what we normally get for corn on the cob or frozen corn kernels. Or you can grow dent corn, and this is for drying and you can grind it into cornmeal. But if you want to grow both in the same garden, you really want to stagger your planting times by 2 to 3 weeks at least, or separate them by at least 300 feet to prevent cross-pollination. Cross-pollination is not typically a bad thing with other vegetables. If you cross-pollinate squash and zucchini, it's not going to cause a problem. It'll make it where you won't be able to save seeds reliably for the next year. But with corn, it's different. With cross-pollination between sweet corn and dent corn, this can actually toughen the sweet corn kernels, which will affect the harvest flavor and the texture. So if you're wanting to do sweet corn and dent corn, just make sure and separate the plantings. Now, I've always found it interesting to potentially make cornmeal, but I have never grown this flint corn or dent corn in my garden. I've always focused on sweet corn because that's what my family likes. So I don't have personal experience with this, but if you are interested in growing corn for cornmeal, all you have to do is let the ears dry fully on the stalk or indoors until the kernels are rock hard, and then you're going to shell them, and then you can grind them in a grain meal and then sift them to get the coarseness that you want. As far as quantity goes, because I know that's helpful with planning how much you're going to plant, supposedly you can expect approximately 1 cup of meal per large ear. And then once you grind it, make sure to store it airtight in a freezer for long-term freshness. If anyone has tried doing this, I would love to hear from you. And if you decide to try it next year, please let me know. I think that would be so much fun. All right, next let's talk about green beans. Green beans are high in vitamin C, folate, and fiber. They support our immunity, they support our digestion, and they are especially valuable when paired with starchy Thanksgiving sides. Now, here's the thing. When I think about growing green beans and serving them every day, I just take my can out that I've canned from the summer and I just put it in the pot and then I heat it up and there's that. But Thanksgiving's a little bit different. My son especially loves green bean casserole. That's been his favorite thing since he was a little boy. So we always have to have green bean casserole on the Thanksgiving table. And then I have learned to love this green bean casserole. I don't really know if it's called green bean casserole, but you pair it with bacon and butter and even some brown sugar. And it's this decadent green bean dish. Side note, that is actually how I learned to like green beans. Growing up, I never liked green beans in any way. But then when my father-in-law was sick with cancer, someone brought him a meal, and they had this delicious green bean dish that had bacon and butter and sugar. And I know it sounds terribly unhealthy, but I ate it and I was like, oh, I might actually learn to like green beans. And after that, I started liking them plain a little bit more. They're still not my favorite, but I still will eat them. And that was my first introduction. All that to say, whether you like your green bean casserole or you like it smothered with bacon and butter, I will make you feel a little bit better today. This is probably not what we want every day. It's probably not the healthiest thing to do on an everyday basis, but the fats in those dishes helps the body absorb the fat soluble nutrients from the beans. So at least for Thanksgiving, you can give yourself a pass and realize if you're going to eat that green bean casserole or that buttered green beans, then hey, it's helping my body absorb the nutrients better, right? Also, green beans are one of the easiest things that you can grow. For everything that we've talked about today, green beans are really easy. You can grow them as pole beans up a trellis, which are gorgeous, or if you don't have a trellis, you can choose bush beans. They're a warm season crop, so all you need to know is you can directly sow the seeds in your garden after the frost, but I would recommend waiting a week or two after the frost because what those seeds really need is warm temperatures of the soil, like 65 to 70 degree soil, so they can sprout without rotting in the ground. They mature really quickly. They are really fast. I have had my green beans go from planting to harvest in the middle of the summer like a little over a month. Typically, they're about 45 days. They're a little longer than that if you're growing pole beans because they're climbing, but they really are an easy crop. And it would be probably the first thing if you're a beginning gardener to grow in your garden to plan for Thanksgiving. That was one of the first things that I did when I was a beginning gardener and we were having Thanksgiving at my mother-in-law's house. And I'm like, I signed up for the green beans because that's what I had that year. And it was a perfect introduction to being able to supply my own food that I grew for the Thanksgiving table. And then ultimately, I eventually graduated to sweet potatoes and some of the other things as well. Next, we're going to be talking about my favorite Thanksgiving side. But first, I have to tell you about a Black Friday gardening deal that is already happening. And yes, you can go ahead and get this early before the Thanksgiving and Black Friday rush. Epic Gardening has kicked off their Black Friday sale and it runs now through December 1st, and you can get 25% off site-wide. This includes my favorite Birdie's metal raised beds. They're grow bags. You can get the grow bags lined or not lined. I love the ones that I have that are lined. I feel like they are so much better than the ones that I bought from Amazon. And then you can get seed starting supplies. These are seed starting supplies that I use every single year without fail. They last forever, one purchase, and you're not going to need to buy anything. I mean, I have no idea, probably for many years. But pretty much all the things that we need to set ourselves up for a great garden season, Epic Gardening is offering for sale. Plus, they are layering in some really fun gift with purchase bonuses, such as free shipping if you spend $50 or more. And they also have some gifts that include seeds and seed starting, just depending on how much you spend. And here's the best part. You can stack my code for an additional 5% off of these deals. So Birdie's Raised Beds, consider it 30% off. This is a great idea, especially if you already plan on adding some raised beds. This is a great time to get it and get it all set up so it's ready for you in the spring. All you have to do to get this extra 5% off is to use my code Journey with Jill. And then you can shop with my link, journeywithjill.net/epic. And also a quick heads up, if you love green stalk sales, keep an eye because they are having something new called their 12 Days of Doorbusters. And this kicks off on November 20th. I'll be sharing more with you soon, but just so you know, all of these Black Friday deals are just beginning. Our team has been hard at work collecting these so that we can have them ready for you, both to share with you on the podcast, but more so to send you in an email that we send you every Friday so that you have the exact links and the exact codes to get the discounts that you need. So if you don't get my emails on Fridays, check out the link in the show notes or go to journeywithjill.net/garden signup. But also anything that we talked about today, we'll have the links and the discount codes for you in the show notes. Okay, now let's talk about my very favorite Thanksgiving dish. And this is something that was never really my favorite as a kid, but as I got older and I started trying different things, I started to love sweet potatoes, specifically sweet potato casserole. Now, Sweet potatoes are native to Central and South America. This makes sense. They really love warm weather, but they were brought to North America by the Spanish in the 50s, and they're cultivated widely in the American South. This has been going on since about the 1600s. But interestingly enough, if you go to your grocery store aisle and you look for sweet potatoes, you'll probably see something called yams. And these are actually orange fleshed sweet potatoes. True yams are starchy African tubers, and they're a different plant family entirely. So if you haven't grown sweet potatoes this year yet, and they're on your list for next year, but you have to go and get the canned variety this year, and it says yams, just know that you are buying sweet potatoes. Now, if you want to grow your sweet potatoes next year, they grow well in the ground, in raised beds, in large grow bags. I've done all three of them. They love warm soil. They love the heat. This is why it's so important to make sure that they are growing in the warmest conditions possible for as long as possible. You can start slips indoors. I have a YouTube video showing you exactly how to do that from a mother tuber. This is what I've done year after year. I haven't had to buy any sweet potato slips for years because I keep developing them off of my previous year's harvest. And you'll do this about 6 to 8 weeks before planting out. But if you don't want to do this, you usually can buy sweet potato slips either at your local garden center, or I know Wood Prairie Family Farm sells them as well. And the key is to get them planted. For me, it's about a month or even more after my average last frost date. It needs to be very warm when you plant them out. As far as your Thanksgiving table, when you're eating that sweet potato casserole, you can feel good that you're getting beta carotene, which will be converted into vitamin A for eye and immune health, and also manganese for metabolism and bone strength. And again, like I said before, when your sweet potatoes are paired with a little bit of fat, like butter or olive oil, this actually helps our body absorb vitamin A more efficiently. So yes, your Thanksgiving butter is doing some good. Number 6, let's talk about sage. This is my favorite herb for Thanksgiving. It's actually been used since ancient times for its antimicrobial and digestive properties. And I love it for both medicine and for cooking. Created into a hot tea, it's really good for the throat, especially if you're going through any kind of cold throughout the winter. But it also contains digestive benefits. It contains compounds that stimulate bile flow and aid in fat digestion, which is perfect for easing the heavy Thanksgiving meal if you end up eating sweet potato casserole with butter and green bean casserole and all the things with lots of butter. It's going to be helping your body aid that fat digestion. I love growing it and drying it for my homemade dressing. This is a family recipe that I have made ever since I've been an adult, but I've had it since I was a kid. To me, it's not the same without sage. But once I started growing sage on my own and adding it to the Thanksgiving dressing, it became so much better. I can't tell you the difference between homegrown sage and what you buy on the shelf. To me, it makes a huge difference. And the great news is, like we talked about a couple episodes ago with growing sage, it's perennial in zones 4 through 8. And right before your first frost is a great time to harvest so that you can have it at peak freshness for your Thanksgiving flavor. Vegetable number 7 we'll talk about is celery. This is a Thanksgiving staple because it provides an essential flavor base for your dressing, like I just mentioned before, or even soups and casseroles. Now, even though it's a native to the Mediterranean, it was brought to North America by colonists in the 1600s. Celery can be a little bit tricky to grow, especially for those of us who live in warmer areas, because it loves cool weather and it needs consistent moisture. Out of everything that I grow in my garden, maybe except for corn, celery requires the most water. But the reason why it can be a little tricky is that it needs to be started very early. If you're going to be starting it for the spring, you need to start it 10 to 12 weeks before your last frost, and maybe even more. Just to give you a little context, my average last frost date is early April. I start my celery seeds in mid-January, and I plant my celery out usually at the end of March, a couple of weeks before my average last frost date. And then if I plant it in the fall, I'm starting those seeds in the middle of July. It just takes a long time to start from seed. If you can get them as transplants as a first-time gardener, this may be easier for you. But just remember that they really like cool weather, although they're a little picky and they don't like super cold weather. So anything under 28 degrees or so, they're probably going to suffer. And if you live in a really hot climate, you might want to consider some partial shade. But celery is great because it provides vitamin K, which helps with bone health. It also, and I didn't know this, I mean, those of you guys who are into juicing probably knew this, but I didn't know this. It provides electrolytes like sodium and potassium that help maintain hydration through the dry winter months. And when we pair it with starchy foods like potatoes, like in potato salad, its natural sodium enhances the flavor without added salt. I found that really interesting because I always wondered, why do we always eat celery with potatoes? And I didn't realize that it would add that salt with that flavor. Obviously, I'm not a cook, but it makes complete sense. So celery is one of those that, again, I love putting it in my Thanksgiving dressing. And to me, homegrown celery is just so much more flavorful. All right, finally, I'm going to give you a bonus crop, and this is cranberries. And I share this as a bonus crop mainly because this one has been one I have tried to grow twice, and I have not been successful. I thought that it would be perfect for me because cranberries like acidic, damp soil, and they like soil similar to blueberries. And my blueberries thrive where I'm located, but despite trying them twice, they failed both times. I don't exactly know why. I did buy them as transplants from a local garden center, but I think maybe we got a little bit too hot in zone 8A because cranberries like to be grown in zones 2 through 7. So we're talking about maybe a cooler season plant. Containers are supposed to actually work well. Maybe I should try that again, but again, if it's the heat, I'm not quite sure. But because they like acidic soil, use an acidic base. And you've seen the Ocean Spray commercials, right? Where they grow cranberries and they're harvesting them in the water. That's what brought that to mind because I thought we can grow this because we get really wet in the early spring. Cranberries should be fine. I put them in a really low lying area of my garden. Yeah, just the best of plans don't always work. But all that to say, keep them evenly moist, but never flooded. I think that's probably what happens at the harvest, not necessarily how you want to grow them. They're not like rice. But most varieties are self-fertile, but planting too improves the yield. Here's the thing though, and I don't have personal experience with this obviously, but from what I've read, harvesting can be a little labor intensive. The berries must color fully before picking, and it's just not as easy as blueberries. But again, I love cranberries. I not only eat them obviously with cranberry sauce with Thanksgiving, but I eat cranberries, dried cranberries in my breakfast or on my salads. So I would have loved to grow them. Maybe I need to try them again. I just don't know if we're too hot. If anybody has had experience with that, please let me know. I would love to hear from you. But the thing is about cranberries is it's rich in vitamin C, which we've talked about before, boosts resilience and immunity heading into the cold season. And cranberries have antioxidants that help reduce inflammation. So hopefully you can hear with all of these crops that we talked about, all of these foods that may be on your Thanksgiving table, you can see that there's a wide variety of nutrients here. We talked about lots of different vitamins, and I just think that's really neat to see how all of these foods that have somehow found their way on our Thanksgiving table complement each other, and they do help to nourish us. I hope that this episode has helped you see this food a little bit differently. It's not just something on your plate that you eat every year, but hopefully, if you are growing any of these, something that started in the soil. And hopefully, as you are eating your Thanksgiving meal, you'll remember these things and you will know that you are nourishing yourself. And truly, whether you grew it yourself or whether it was provided for you or whether you bought the ingredients, we are sitting down to be grateful for the harvest because all of this came from a harvest of some sort, and we can be grateful for that. Now, if hearing about any of these crops has you dreaming about growing your own potatoes or sweet potatoes or even celery next year, don't forget my 2026 Complete Garden Planner is ready to guide you through all the brainstorming. It includes space, like I said, for your garden layout. But right now, probably the biggest thing that you'll want to do is start considering what varieties of each of these that you want to plant, based on what grows best in your climate, or even in the case of potatoes, based on how you want to eat them. So you can go to journeywithjill.net/shop and grab your 2026 Complete Garden Planner. It's the perfect companion as you start dreaming about your garden next year. And don't forget, those Black Friday deals are starting now. Check out the link in the show notes for all of that. And as we conclude, I just want to tell you how grateful I am that you are here, that you are listening. I'm grateful for all the messages that you all send and how encouraging you are to me. It makes me love doing this every week, and I look forward to continuing to hopefully inspire you as you create your own garden next year. So thank you so much for joining me, and I will chat with you again next week.